What's the most unusual way to find true love? Is it thousands of feet in the air, hundreds of feet below the ocean's surface, or maybe just a mile from home on a train? Regardless, a fleeting moment can leave a lasting impression. Carlos not only found his true love, but also encountered an entirely unexpected experience. One he is sure to remember for a long time. The story began when Carlos got a promotion. He had just been promoted to locomotive engineer after working for several years as a train fireman. This was a big step forward in his career because it matched the goals he had set for himself. Carlos couldn't continue his education because he was the oldest son and had to support his family at a young age, taking care of his 4 siblings, 1 brother and 3 sisters. His mother was getting older and couldn't help much. Carlos had never been to college. He loved learning but barely finished high school, even though he was one of the smartest in his class. However, he promised himself he would never feel bad about his situation. He had a positive outlook on life, just like his late father. Since he couldn't go to school, Carlos worked hard at his job as a locomotive engineer. He wanted to make sure his siblings got the education he missed out on, and whenever they came home with great grades, he beamed with pride. He aimed to reach the highest level in his profession, no matter what. However, one thing you should know about Carlos's new position is that most workers never attain that rank until they are in their 60s. So suffice it to say, Carlos, being a passenger train driver in his early 30s, didn't earn him a welcome party among the older workers. Instead, he was met with unprovoked resentment from his older colleagues, who felt he hadn't paid his dues to earn that position. But Carlos's passion made him one of the best employees in the locomotive company, and he advanced quickly. While other conductors would give funny excuses, Carlos was always accountable. He wore a pleasant smile every single time, and when he noticed the resentment from the other workers, he made sure to work his hardest so they couldn't find anything against him. Carlos was given the busiest schedule, which often consumed his holidays. While the older drivers navigated the best available routes, Carlos was sent through the dullest ones. To make matters worse, he was assigned to the older locomotives while his older colleagues received the new ones. One thing that bothered Carlos was the fact that he was always working and didn't have enough time for himself. How was he going to find a beautiful woman to spend the rest of his life with? This was the next thing on his list. Coincidentally, he wasn't the only one thinking about this. His older colleagues had thought about it too. In their attempts to frustrate him, they joked, "He's never going to get married. Where will he find enough time to court a lady?" Although Carlos was wildly knowledgeable, he had a single wish in his heart: true love at first sight, the kind he had seen in Disney animations. Carlos believed it was possible as long as he desired it. Sadly, it wasn't forthcoming. Carlos was friends with the dispatch officer in the company. The man was older as well, but unlike the older drivers, he was quite fond of a passionate young man. "I see myself in you," he told Carlos one afternoon, "and I want you to be successful in this line of work. Don't pay attention to those other drivers, rather, focus on how much more you can achieve as you progress." The dispatch officer made sure that even though Carlos didn't get to travel through the bustling metropolis, he would at least try to see new places whenever he was assigned to travel. Carlos was particularly excited with each trip. The more places you get to see, the wider your mind will become, his mother always echoed in his ears. Carlos made the best of each opportunity when he passed through the forests and small settlements. He made sure to take in all that his eyes could see, particularly the women, since he was still in search of a wife. However, he was also worried about his back-breaking work schedule. On a particular day, Carlos was sent way out of town alongside a few passengers and deliveries. The older drivers had each given excuses to dump the job on him. It was a boring ride. Carlos' only companions were the tall trees that stood on either side of the track and the silence of the forest and bushes around him. The dispatch officer had retired a month earlier, and his replacement was not favorable to any of the drivers. However, Carlos wasn't the only person sent on this errand. The older drivers also had a share in the workload. But unlike them, Carlos accepted his fate as happily as he could. He whistled to himself instead of complaining and hummed his favorite song. He had every right to be angry, especially since he worked the hardest and was the most reliable employee. But Carlos had his eyes on another promotion, so he was on extra good behavior. The train spluttered to life and began its journey through the monotonous route. The railway was routed through an endless expanse of trees and bushes. Carlos decided to steer the train at a moderate speed. It was unfamiliar territory, and he was conscious of every turn. Hours into the journey, Carlos caught sight of a flagpole way ahead of him. He halted the train as he got close to the flagpole. It wasn't on the map, and he hadn't seen anything like it. It had unfamiliar stripes. The first thing that crossed Carlos's mind was the possibility of a robbery. At least, that is what most Hollywood movies depicted. As the train grumbled under the order of a sudden stop, Carlos set his eyes on the bushes. In those few minutes, he had rehearsed and mastered over a dozen jiu-jitsu maneuvers in his head. He jumped down from the driver's cab, and as he took the next step toward the strange flagpole, he heard a female voice behind him. Carlos was startled by the voice. He had been expecting a husky voice from the woods. He turned around to find a pretty young woman behind him. She had smooth brown hair packed in a ponytail. "I'm Alina, one of the passengers," she introduced herself. Carlos returned the courtesy before proceeding toward the flagpole. Alina had been concerned about the train's sudden stop. Carlos was only a few feet from the flagpole when he suddenly jumped back in fear. What he thought were stripes turned out to be a large snake. He looked around for a log of wood to drive it off their path. He didn't intend to kill the reptile. But as he looked closer, he saw something else that instantly sent a chill down his spine. In a bundle of cloth tied to the flagpole was a sleeping baby girl. He immediately called Alina's attention to his discovery. There was no time to question how the baby got there. The other passengers watched in confusion. They couldn't come near, as their presence might cause the reptile to assume a defensive position and coil itself around the bundle of cloth containing the baby. After a few minutes, Carlos managed to distract the snake, and Alina quickly grabbed the baby from the bundle of cloth. Carlos watched as Alina cared for the baby, and in that moment, he realized he had fallen for her at first sight. However, while he was lost in thought, the snake wrapped around his boots and bit him before slithering away. Thankfully, the snake wasn't venomous, and the bite didn't cause any serious harm. They boarded the train to cheers from the other passengers, and fortunately for Carlos, there was a doctor on board. Carlos and Alina took the child to an orphanage since they couldn't find her mother anywhere. A few months later, they went on their first date, and several months after that, Carlos and Alina were happily married. They also adopted the baby girl, forming a unique family from their unexpected encounter. What do you think of Carlos' story? Does it remind you of any of your own experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments. I hope you like this story. Please like, share, subscribe to our channel. Thank you.